So the top question, you touched on people who will not change mind on a topic regardless. What role can logic play in engaging these people? So I'm just going to leave those people for now, because they're so far away. Why would I start with the people who are the absolutely furthest away? I think there are some people who are much closer. So if I can reach people who want to use logic but don't use it very well, or who do use logic but just have different starting points. There are people who are much closer, who are quite reasonable, and we can have sensible discussions with them. And I think if we can get everybody just to move a bit more this way, then the people over there will either have to move this way a bit, or they'll be so much more isolated than they are at the moment. Or the people who are, we can talk to the people who are closest to us, and they can talk to the people who are closest to them, who can then talk to the people who are closest to them, and eventually we'll reach these people. But I think that we can get very depressed if we just always focus on the people who are most impossible to reach. And if we decide that we can't change anything because of those people, then we are in danger of giving up. And if we believe we can't do anything, then we will not be able to do anything. And so I would rather do things where I can, rather than exhaust myself and sap my own mental health by trying to deal with the people who are really far away at the moment. As a current grad student, I find your alternative academic career so inspiring. Oh, thank you. I'm curious what your path was like. Well, that's sort of what my next book is about, because of all the things I've learned about gender and character on that way. So the short story is that I was originally a normal math professor in a normal university, and I just didn't like it. I was very miserable. I finally got that thing that everyone's dreaming of, which is tenure, and then I was miserable. And I decided that I wasn't doing enough good in the world. So not only that, but also I was making myself miserable. So I was kind of heading towards the stupid part of that diagram. And so I decided to try and do more good in the world and also be less miserable. And so I changed everything around, and that's why I started writing books. Then this amazing opportunity to teach at the Art Institute came up, which I had no idea that existed. But as soon as I saw it, I thought, that's my dream job, because it gives me so many opportunities to understand people who are afraid of math. And I can use that opportunity to learn from them and then share that with the whole rest of the world. And I'm so much happier being here in Chicago than I was before. I'm from England, and I do miss England in some ways. It's all going wrong over there, as many other places. But I do love being in Chicago, and one day I sat down and I thought, what would I do if there were no constraints of borders, of money, or anything? And it was easy. I just thought I'd come back to Chicago, and I would make something up. I don't know what I'd be able to make something up. Because to me, I was here as a postdoc, and I felt that Chicago was a place where it was a really good place where I could make things up, that I could do projects the way I wanted to and not be just shoved into a pigeonhole the whole time. And I just feel like there's an air of possibility, at least for me here. And I understand that there are many problems for other people, and that's why I feel a responsibility to try and do things to help with those inequalities, because I'm aware that I am on the benefiting end of that situation, and that things are much better for me here than they were in the UK. You gave a definition of empathy. Would you repeat that and expand on it? Thank you. I think that it might have been a characterization or a point of view on empathy rather than a full definition. But it was that it is analogies between people. And so if we can make an analogy between somebody else and ourselves, then we can empathize with them without having literally experienced the same things as them. If we can sort of map it onto something that we can understand, it is a way that we can access empathy without having to actually experience those things or directly sympathize with them. And that's something that I think the abstraction helps, because one of the problems with empathy can be if we strongly disagree with someone in some way or something upsets us, then being upset can really get in the way of empathizing with another person. So for example, if somebody says something that we think is really obnoxious, then we might think it's completely impossible to empathize with them because we're so angry about this thing that they're thinking. But if we abstract from that situation, then I feel that I can understand their logic from their point of view abstractly without having to agree with them and without having to validate what they're thinking either. But that also involves using empathy, because if someone else asked this question as well, that how can you start having discussions with people who are so far away? And what I do is that I use empathy to understand what their logic is, even if they can't articulate it themselves. And I always find that I can. And so some people say, I just don't understand why someone would say that. And I always can. I can always find some understanding of it. And it always comes down to some fundamental belief of theirs that's completely different from mine. And sometimes the fundamental belief is so strong and it's not something I would consider fundamental, that then I don't know what to do. So it's true that then I can't actually solve the situation, but I can understand how they're thinking. And I think that is a really important first step. When you shared these ideas and methods with art students, what happened? Oh, so that ties into some other questions that people asked about what I teach and how I teach at the School of the Art Institute. And what happens is that are any of my students here, just before I start speaking for them? So what they tell me, and I like to think that they don't have to lie to me about it, because we have no grades, so it's not like anything depends on this. They tell me that they completely changed their mind about what math is, and about whether it's relevant to them, and they realize that it is relevant to them. And not only is it relevant to their daily lives, but it's even relevant to their art practice, and it affects how they make art. And they say things like that they wish that they had been taught math like that in high school and earlier on, because then they wouldn't have been put off. So some people have wonderful math teachers, and some people don't get to have so many wonderful math teachers. And if only we could have more wonderful math teachers, and I'm sure there are some of you in the room now, because if you're here, you're sort of by definition wonderful because you bothered to come here. And I think that if we cared more about education, especially at lower levels, then that would really help. So I think, for example, that we revere university professors much more than elementary school teachers, and I think that's the wrong way around. I think elementary school teachers are much more important than university professors, because they're at the front line. It's the very first educational experience that children have. And because we don't value them enough, then they don't have the resources that they need to be able to teach in the ways that they want to. And so children get put off math at that very early point. And then they go all the way through school and they can't wait to get rid of math, and then they come to the School of the Art Institute and they take my course and they go, oh, I didn't know that math could be like that. And sometimes I take great care to stress with them what a high level of math we're doing, because I teach them category theory, which you would usually only do if you're a grad student in pure math. And because they can do it, they think that it must just be really easy math. And so I'm always saying, you know, I didn't learn this until I was in grad school, and then they can't believe it. So that happens. Your thoughts in this talk are going to be mostly well received by an audience like this, but have you taken this presentation to venues where logic is less esteemed? Well, so it's kind of, it's hard because it's up to people to come to the event, right? And so yes, it is a bit self-selecting, although it seems from the next question that there might be someone who doesn't like what I say. But there certainly have been people who don't like what I say. But most people like logic and think that they're using it. And so everyone thinks that everyone else is being illogical, and I don't think that's very productive. I think that everyone is being logical, but everyone is being differently logical based on different starting points. And so if someone really disagrees, then I try to understand what it is that they're so upset about. And so far, it has almost always been white men who feel like they're tired of being told that they have privilege when they feel that they have struggled or worked really hard in the world. So that's usually what happens. I think I might skip over the next one. Which it doesn't make very much sense. It sounds like the next person is simply angry. And I'm sorry that you're angry. I don't think it's true that the Clintons violated the law in mathematical proof. I don't think that's how mathematical proof works, nor is it what mathematical proof is. But I'm going to try and understand what you mean, which is I think that you're angry about something. So some people have got angry that I seem to be using logic just to back up my apparently, evidently, fairly left-wing views. Well, that's true. Everyone can use logic to back up their views, and I'm completely upfront about the fact that I have certain fundamental beliefs and that I apply logic to my fundamental beliefs, and that's where my views come from. And so one thing I've realized is that the fundamental beliefs that cause political differences are often to do with the interaction between the individual and society. And so people who believe more about individuals are more likely to be very much more right-wing than me. But whereas I believe in the societies and the fact that we're all part of a society and society works as a whole, that's why I believe most of the things that I do. When you shared, oh, I've done that one already. Oh, you're an excellent concert pianist. I've heard you play. Well, thank you. How do you merge your two worlds? That's interesting because I used to not merge them at all and think that they were completely opposite and just balanced out each other by extremes. But now I teach a class about math and music at the Art Institute. And I used to hate being asked about math and music because most people, when they think about math and music, they think about the most boring parts of math and the most boring parts of music, which is counting. People say, oh yeah, there's counting in both. And I think, well, that's the most boring part of both, so there is that. But I realized that I think math is about structures, and that's what I love most about classical music, is the structures. I'm not so interested in pretty melodies and things. I really love the structures inside music, and that's what I mostly teach in my math and music class. If two hierarchies don't agree, is the answer always to pivot? Maybe? Is the answer always? I think the answer is always that you could get some insight by pivoting, and by understanding what is causing the hierarchies to disagree, and to try and understand why someone is very upset about that. How can you get someone who hates math to see the virtue in empathizing with a different point of view? That's interesting because most people I meet who hate math hate it because they prefer emotional, creative, and empathetic things. And so, in fact, bringing empathy and emotions into it helps them to feel more about math. So many of my art students come in hating math. Not all of them, but many of them do. And it's often because they think it has no creativity and they think it's all black and white answers. And when I show that it has tons of creativity, loads of ambiguity, and that it's not about the right answers, but it's about understanding different contexts in which different things might be true, in order to sort of create worlds in which different things can be true, in order to understand different situations and different possibilities, then they get much more interested in it. And when it's not just about rules that they're supposed to follow, but they can make their own things up and just explore, then they also get much more interested in it. Many Americans are learning about the impeachment hearings only via Fox News, which distorts the hearings. I assume that the left-wing media also distorts the hearings. How can logic help break through? I've been thinking about this a lot because of the unbelievably egregious, gosh, this is being live streamed. I think probably the UK is asleep. So there's been some unbelievably egregious things going on in the run-up to the election in the UK. Like that during the last debate, I don't know if you heard about this, the Conservative Party changed their Twitter so that they called themselves a fact-checking site. They posed as an impartial fact-checking site, but it was actually the Conservative Party Twitter feed. And they tweeted as fact-checking during the election debate. And the mind boggles. And so I was thinking that what I would love to see is a class in high school on fact-checking, so that everyone is automatic, it sort of trains themselves whenever they read anything to just immediately figure out whether it's true or not. And the class would run by the teacher providing different articles, some of which are true and some of which are not true, or the extent, and to get the students to figure out the extent to which they think they're true or not by investigating and cross-checking and assessing the reliability of the sources. And I think that if there were a course like that everyone took in high school, it would become second nature, that you wouldn't be able to not do it anymore. And that my students tell me that because of the way we think about things in class, they just keep doing that all through life. Because I relate it to things in life, that they just get into the habit of doing it. And so I like to think that if there were classes like that in school, everyone would get into the habit of immediately questioning the reliability of sources and what their biases are. Because that's what I do automatically all the time. And then maybe it wouldn't be so easy to fool people with stuff like that. Because they're also just putting up, people are putting up adverts that are just say things that are untrue, and it doesn't matter, there are no repercussions because everyone just reposts them without checking them. And someone else can come along and say it's not true, but that part will never get through. So it is pretty egregious. Do you advise executives? What kind of topics do they deal with? I don't think I have advised any executives yet. I might like to try, but first I'd have to persuade them that they want to listen to me about anything. So I'd like to, that's the top ranked questions. I'd like to address some of the things that people asked me as I was walking around. Do we still have time? Is this okay? It's very interesting. So someone asked me what cisgendered means, so I just thought I'd remind you that means that your gender identity matches the one you were assigned at birth. So it means you're not trans, basically. Someone pointed out that there was a lot more about, there's the slide with the Greta tweet and the egregious Epstein thing. There was a lot more to it than that. Absolutely true. I was focusing on whatever it was that the tweeter was trying to claim was analogous between the two situations. How to use this is where I have to try and read my writing. How to use all this to understand other people if they're being illogical. So I think the first thing is to not label anyone as illogical, because first of all, it alienates them, and secondly, they're probably not being illogical. They're just not being logical relative to your system of logic, but they're being logical relative to their system of logic. And then the onus is on you to understand what their system of logic is. And that's why it helps to be both logically powerful and empathetic, because I feel like I can basically always understand what somebody else's system of logic is, even if they seem to be illogical relative to mine. Someone asked me what I think of Banksy, and the answer is, I'm instinctively attracted to anything that is trying to disrupt the status quo, because I'm fed up with the status quo. And I think that whatever we've been doing to disrupt it hasn't worked fast enough. So maybe we need more subversive, random, I'm not saying it's random, but individual things. We need concerted effort, but we also need individual interventions. How do my aesthetics and artistic and musical aspects tie in with all of these things? Well, first of all, it's meant that I've absolutely had a life, I've placed great value all through my life on emotions, emotional connections with people, visceral communication, and intuition. That it's not just about logic, because I understand music is holds so much power over me, and I've made such strong connections with people through music, where you don't talk about anything, you don't use any logic, you just play a piece of music, and then you're best friends. And so this is what we do at my salon, the Liederstube, which is just over there in the Fine Arts Building. That I play the piano and people can just come and sing, and there's some people here who've been there and sung. And once you've done one song together, if it's a powerful piece of music, that's it, you're friends. You don't have to talk about anything, and that is more powerful than logic. And so I've always had a great respect for emotional connection and intuition. I think I've covered some of those other things. Someone said, who helped me do this analysis? Well, all my students and all the questions that they've asked me, I have to pay a lot of tribute to the questions that my students asked me, because especially the students at SAIC are so deeply thoughtful and curious, and they're so interested in thinking, as opposed to just getting the right answer. Also, everyone who's ever had an obnoxious argument with me, because while I was writing this book, all the obnoxious arguments I got into on Twitter, I thought, well, this is now a case study. And that was very cathartic. And it does help me, it helps me to push to understand the roots of my arguments a lot, but that's also an academic discipline. Imagining all the possible arguments against you is a really important part of being an academic, so that you can make sure that your arguments are strong and that you can preempt the kinds of things people are going to say. And someone asked me about math and liberal arts and how can I help my child. Well, I think that liberal arts is really important. I think that there are many ways to determine what counts as good information, and math is just one of them. And I think that's what education should be about. It shouldn't be about knowledge, because we have knowledge everywhere now. We've all got the whole internet in our pockets. The problem is the opposite. The problem is we've got too much knowledge. We've got too much information everywhere, and what we need is the ability to be discerning about the information, not get the information. And so that's what I think a liberal arts education is or should be for. And how to help your child? Well, specifically with regard to math, it's really important not to say that you're terrible at math, and because that passes on from generation to generation. And if you're afraid of math, fear passes on from generation to generation. And there's also this funny thing where if you're afraid of math and you help your children with their homework, they get worse. So maybe just don't help them with their homework. It's their homework. Let them do their homework, but encourage them. And also, see that math is everywhere around us, and try and find ways to talk about it in a positive way. There are many resources online that can help with that. And I think it's really important, because if people grow up afraid of math and science, we get into a situation where we have science deniers, we have climate deniers, we are unable to have sensible arguments. And I hope that the young people now, I have great hope that they're going to do better than us, because we're doing pretty terribly at the moment. And I have great hope. I'm an optimist, and that's why I'm in education. And I think that the next generation can do better. And I hope that we'll all join in helping them to do better for the next generations after that. Thank you very much.